Like, I have 3 boys, and I hear this all the time, like, men are trash, men suck, is just in the water. And I think it's incredibly psychologically harmful for this generation of boys to just go around hearing that over and over and over again.
If this is feminism,
call men stupid in every possible way that you can.
Listen to me try to say the word trash with my Rotarian. Men.
then where does that leave men? I wanted to have a conversation about masculinity in a post-Me Too world. So today I'm talking to Ruth Whippman, author of Boy Mom, a book about raising young men, and Frederick Joseph, author of Patriarchy Blues. Frederick, Ruth, thank you so much for being here with me today to talk about masculinity. Okay, just a little table setting. Where are we now? How would you describe the state of young men in this country right now?
I think that we are in an abysmal state. I think the realities are we've always had patriarchy at the intersection of capitalism and white supremacy and how those things feast on one another and lift one another. But I think right now, more times than not, the role models that these young boys and young men have are not only divisive and toxic, but insidious and heinous, disgusting. Truly, I mean, the president of the United States is an alleged rapist. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? You know, the popular thing that boys are watching is largely MMA, right? So I think we're in a horrible place.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I feel like young men are kind of caught between these two, competing, but both harmful narratives. One of them is this kind of almost what you're describing, this real caricatured masculinity, this these things that have always been in existence, this tough guy, bulletproof man, but just taken to this caricatured extreme. And you're seeing it almost on the left as well as on the right. But then on the other extreme, more from the progressive left, I think you've got this shut up narrative, which is just your problems aren't real, they don't matter, you have so much privilege, you have everything, time for everybody else to have a voice and for you to be quiet. And I think it's just really hard to navigate. I think they feel shut down from all directions, honestly.
Before we get deeper into things, I want to hear a little bit from each of you, just sort of the highlight reel net graph of how you would approach a conversation about masculinity. So, Ruth, you've done a lot of reporting on the subject, and you also wrote a book about raising sons. Can you give us just sort of where you're coming from when you're talking about masculinity?
Yeah, I think when we talk about masculinity, we have to talk about patriarchy. And I think we see this as this system which harms everyone, including men. I think often people take a gender studies class in college or whatever, and they learn patriarchy harms men, and then they're well, great, okay, put that aside, and then move on, forget about it. And, and I know that when we're kind of triaging these issues, is harm to men the worst abuse of patriarchy? No, probably harm to women and trans people and people of other genders is more urgent. But I think if we can see ourselves as part of a system of patriarchy that harms all of us, and we are allies in this fight rather than men versus women, men oppressing women, then I think we can have a more productive conversation.
Yeah. Frederick, you wrote a book of essays and poems called Patriarchy Blues. You also spend a lot of time talking to men in the world. Where are you coming from when you're talking about masculinity?
Yeah, I think for me, I look at patriarchy in the same way that many people during the sort of 2020 moment were looking at racism and white supremacy. You can't dismantle patriarchy without an anti-patriarchy movement, right? And the thing that we were telling people was largely that there was a return on investment for dismantling white supremacy. There was a return on investment for dismantling racism. And that's my argument as well for patriarchy. I tell young men all the time, you're not in these systems allowed to be a whole human being, right? The thing that you are entitled to, they teach you, is your rage. And then even that you're not really entitled to. They don't teach you how to cry. They don't teach you how to laugh. They don't want you laughing. They don't want you crying because they actually do sort of, in capitalism, want to monetize that rage of yours. That's how you get the manosphere. And I think we oftentimes teach it as do you want to do sort of like charity? You're not, this isn't charity that you're doing for women by dismantling patriarchy. This is not charity by dismantling misogyny. This is actually the work of self.
Yeah.
Right.
I really relate to that. I mean, I think as you were saying in my own thinking around white supremacy, I had to come to what do this is just being a narcissistic millennial in the world, but what do I stand to gain from dismantling white supremacy, a system that seems to benefit me in so many ways?
Right.
And for me, the answer to that is the fullness of my humanity. And I really was thinking a lot when approaching this conversation about how do we do the same thing for patriarchy? Because one of the questions I think a lot of young men have is, what does positive masculinity look like? Like, I don't think that I know the image that the manosphere posits of masculinity, and I think it's one that also encompasses a lot of misogynistic ideas. And I know so many men who are not misogynists and who want to be living in a gender equal world, but who are still men, who still need an idea of masculinity that feels positive to them. And how both have you sort of thought about this question and how to answer it, and how do we get to a place where there are so few answers for it?
For me, like, positive masculinity as a sort of framework is not my preferred framework for thinking about this issue or like what to do for young men. In the same way that if someone was trying to sell any like hypothetical daughter like positive femininity instead of feminism, I think I would push back on that as well, because I think it's already like setting the terms in quite a restrictive way that sort of ends up like slightly reinforcing gender stereotypes. So like I think I would rather that we sort of move towards giving boys and men like a vision of being a full person, like a full human, and rather than like gendering qualities and being like, these qualities are masculine and these qualities are feminine, and like how do we navigate and pick and choose between those, and like what's the sort of minimum amount of femininity that we can choose to in order to like not emasculate ourselves totally. I'd rather we're just like, okay, just be a person, you know, like these are minimum standards and minimum qualities that we expect from every adult, and they don't need to be different ones for men than for women.
I think that, and I hear that, and I think for me, you kind of have to have a sense of positive masculinity only because we do live in the boxes of the society that we currently live in, right? I think that that vision would be beautiful if it wasn't for the fact that like we have femicide and all these different things, right? And I think there is so much toxic masculinity, and I hear boys all the time say, I literally do not know what it means to be a good boy or man because I think on the one hand, all you see is these, you know, terrible role models who aren't role models at all. And on the other hand, you have people saying what isn't good, but you have to tell people what can be good, right? Looking at race, right? And they're not a one for one, but you actually have to have positive sort of like ideas of what it means to be like a decent white person, right? Like, and that was one of the things in my first book that I pushed heavily, is that you can be a decent white person, and being a decent white person is not going to be the same as being a decent Persian or a decent Black person or a decent Asian person, because the systems and institutions prop up and lift and are owned by, ran by, and controlled by white people. So if the systems of patriarchy, while again, like you're 100% right, patriarchy impacts us all in various ways, but men are the issue in large part. Yeah. You know, men are the issue in large part with patriarchy. So I do think that we have to show what a decent man is.
One of the things that made me really want to have this conversation is that I just feel like, I mean, everyone is siloed into their own social media spaces. But for me, when I'm looking at social media, so much of what I see online and so much of what I hear women say is men are trash. Sabrina Carpenter said the key to her songwriting is just to call men stupid in as many ways as you can. I really understand where women's anger comes from. I have lived it, but I also feel so much tenderness for my brother, for other men I know. And if I were hearing the same kinds of messages in reverse that were just women are trash, I wouldn't know how to begin to approach the world. And so I wonder sort of how specifically on the left, because I think that there are different answers to this on the right, but specifically on the left, which is where I hear men are trash the most loudly, what effect is this having on boys? Do they hear it? Do they feel it? And is it empowering for women? Is there another way to be approaching this?
I mean, I think from the perspective of raising, so like I have 3 boys and I hear this all the time. We live in a very progressive community and like men are trash. Mensac, is just in the water. And it's really, really hard when you're raising sons. And they're young. They don't know the entire history of patriarchy, and nor do you want to explain that in every single moment. And it's the justification, so they sort of, in a way, it's supposed to be punching up, isn't it? Men have all the power, men have all the privilege, so it's okay to call them trash and it's not the same as a man calling a woman trash, which is punching down. But those distinctions are getting more and more abstract, especially when you're 12 years old and you've never heard women are trash, and you've heard a lot of men and boys are trash. And I think it's a really I don't think this is helpful. I think it's really harmful. It's not equivalent to misogyny. They're not the same, but it is still I think a real problem. It's really a terrible negative. And I think it's incredibly psychologically harmful for this generation of boys to just go around hearing that over and over and over again.
I think the reality is that women are entitled to a righteous and rightful rage. And this makes sense to me, right? I think that I'm not a woman. I've never lived in, sort of the throes of the worst, iterations of patriarchy, right? I don't have to deal with certain things. And so I just want to name that to begin with. What it reminds me of, though, is a lot of parents not wanting young white children to hear, sort of about the issues with whiteness, right? And the argument became, and I'm one of the people who made the argument, if, Black and brown children are old enough at any age to have to suffer racism, then I think, white children should have to learn and understand their place within racism. And I guess that's the same way I feel about, sort of the idea of misandry and whatnot, is that my conversation with I have a younger brother. He's 14. We have a huge age gap, obviously. And I've been having conversations with him about who boys and men are in relation to women since he was probably about 6 years old, right? Because I do know he's going to hear and see on the internet, men are trash, men are trash, men are trash. And I guess my answer or my response to that is I'm going to tell you why. Right. And so as opposed to putting sort of the onus on, women and whatnot, I'm placing it on myself and I suppose other men as well. I don't think that the onus should ever be on the victim. I get conceptually how we got here. And so I just sort of look at it I'll see the videos. This is not about me, right? This is not about me. You're not talking about me. I'm trying my best to be a decent man. I'm going to try my best to make a generation of decent boys.
To go back just a step to, if on the left what men are hearing is men are trash, and this is actually, I think, related to what we were just saying, but if on the left what men are hearing is men are trash, doesn't it make sense then that the right is their safe space? And it makes me wonder, clearly, there is an increasing gender divide about how people's politics fall left or right. Men are moving more to the right, women are moving more to the left, and it's only exacerbating these problems. And I think part of what I'm really interested in is how does the left bring men back into the fold?
When I was reporting for my book, I talked to incels in these incel communities, and they absolutely felt like that. They really felt there is nothing for me outside of this. There is I'm lonely and I'm lost. And the one guy that I went quite deep with in particular, he was really I would like to leave this community. I would like to seek help. I would like to find a therapist or talk to another person. But I'm just so scared of hearing your problems don't matter. You're a white man. Everything's great for you. So screw you, basically, from a therapist that I'm not even going to look. And I think part of that was self-justification, but I think there was something really real in that. And I think that he had been hearing those messages, and it's yes, it's not the same, but it's also very real. And I think it is pushing young men towards the right, for sure.
Yeah, the right wing is they're an intelligent collective of people, right? And I think that they understand human nature better than the left. There isn't really a pipeline on the left to lead you to the left. You don't have an Andrew Tate of the left. You don't have, someone similar to a Dana White on the left, Conor McGregor, all these different people. And so I don't think that the left has created a strategy at all for, we have lost a generation of boys, generations of boys and men. How do we get them back? What do we give them to believe in? And who do we give them to believe in? Because I think that's also really important.
My friends who have very young kids have told me that and this is so different from how it was when I was growing up, but they've told me that when they're reading books to their sons, a lot of the narrative of these books are there was a very brave, courageous girl and a dumb boy.
Yeah.
And that like they have to,
yeah.
and that these are progressive books,
Yeah.
and I understand where they're coming from. When I was growing up, I would only write stories with male characters because a male character was a blank slate, whereas a girl had so much to overcome just to begin to enter the story. But things have swung really far the other way. There are now a lot of books that sort of promote feminism at the expense of young boys. And I'm curious if you found that in your...
I mean, I think like, I don't know if you know the movie franchise Inside Out. I think that's, with have you seen it? It's like
Inside Out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a really good example. I was watching them with my son, and it's like this really complex story of this like young girl's interiority and her emotional life. And it's this great portrayal of like a young girl's emotions. And then you go inside her mom's head.
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
And they have this like complex interaction, and she's tracking her mom's emotions and her mom's tracking her emotions, and it's incredibly sophisticated. I don't know if it was every time, but it felt like every time a man came on screen, they were like an emotional idiot. It's like you go inside the dad's head and he's like, and all the like emotion avatars have just got their like feet up on the desk and they're checked out and watching the game. And that's the joke. And I'm watching this with my, like, at the time, 6-year-old son and thinking, what are we telling him here? Like, everyone has a rich emotional life apart from you and you're an idiot. And I was like, that would never pass. Like, if that was a mainstream, like Disney, Pixar movie, whatever, that had like a sexist stereotype about a girl, then we would not stand for it culturally,
I think that some of the issue, right, goes back, or rather goes to this idea of a pendulum swing. Because when you're saying that, I'm like, what's so interesting? Because as a Disney buff, we did have Snow White, right? And we did have, Sleeping Beauty and, sort of like, even like the not only misogyny, but the rape culture of something like Sleeping Beauty even.
Totally.
And so I think now what has happened is, instead of us having a conversation in our society about like, how we create something equitable, I think a lot of people are interested in, okay, I'm going to swing the pendulum the complete opposite way, right? It's like, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And that you can see, I think, directly in sort of like how, the father or the boys are represented. You're like, well, yeah, I can represent you this way because look what you did with Sleeping Beauty.
Look what you did to me, right?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the pendulum swing and thinking about how did we get here, one of the things I really want to talk about is the legacy of Me Too, which I think was, for me personally, an incredibly important movement. I was working at the Paris Review when Me Too happened. The editor-in-chief left at that moment. The culture of the workplace where I was working changed drastically. I have felt like an enormous benefit from that movement in terms of my ability to be taken seriously at work and to move through professional spaces. And I also think that there are a lot of things that we're feeling now in the culture that are the long tail of Me Too. And we're almost 10 years out. And I think it's worth talking about, because I think that this is also the moment when women began to feel, and absolutely guilty of this, very empowered to speak very loudly about the things that men had done that had harmed them, to a degree that perhaps now has just been sort of flattened down to just like all men are trash. And I'm curious, Ruth, in your reporting, I know you've written quite specifically about this, like how you think about the long tail of Me Too.
Yeah, it's a really complicated thing because, like you, I was like thrilled at the Me Too movement, and it absolutely named something that was so real in my experience, and this just like normalization of harassment and abuse and all the rest of it. And I think I understand it was just this like groundswell of rage, but like navigating that as a feminist while raising boys and thinking, all we're hearing, like there's this micro generation of boys that were kind of going through puberty around the time of the Me Too movement, 2016, 2017, who are now like of voting age, of college age, and they have spent their entire adolescence like in the shadow of this conversation, which has been framed very much as like men are predators, men are harmful, men are trash, much of which is true and like so important to talk about. But I feel like there was this real piece missing in that conversation that has left a lot of boys feeling like shut down, rageful, disenfranchised, and like unable to really like find how they're going to make their way in the world,
It's interesting. I think that listening to the two of you reminds me how important it is to understand our different spheres that we're in, right? My sphere is very progressive, but also very Black-centered, very, brown-centered. I've been lucky enough to be very, very much welcomed by deeply intersectional feminists, womanists. And so I think a lot of times the conversations that were being had in a more sort of like mainstream sense, which were largely led by white women. And then there was a reckoning around that because of Tarana Burke and, Tarana Burke having, been the person who largely started a lot of this work in many senses of the word. I had been a part of those conversations, right? I was lucky enough, I went to Hunter College undergrad where Audre Lorde went. So these were not, I went to a very, I think Hunter College is 70% woman. So I'm just lucky to have been in these spaces where I'm not the dominating person, but I do think it's important to name those conversations in the mainstream sense aren't the only conversations that are happening, right? Mm-hmm. There was very much, in my experience, welcoming and thoughts around not only how some men have been harmed, but how trans people have been harmed, how queer people have been harmed, and things like that.
I mean, I think that the conversations that I was hearing happen around Me Too, for me, were revelatory in the sense that I was realizing how universal the experience was of sexual harassment, of rape, of feeling held back at work based on the power dynamics around gender. And I think that was the moment for me in my life when I realized I didn't know any women who hadn't experienced this, which is what Me Too, the word, is about. Right. But that consciousness raising of this is not an individual isolated thing. This is happening so prevalently was enormously useful. And then at the same time, it left, and it caused, I worked, as I was saying, I worked at a workplace where my boss left around this moment and the culture of the workplace changed. But it left so many of my colleagues who were men, white men, who I really respected and who really, to me, it was obvious, respected women, confused about how to act. I had one colleague who was I always take the interns out for drinks. Every year I take the interns out for drinks, but I can't take the interns out for drinks this year because it'll look like I'm trying to get interns drunk and I can't get interns drunk. And he was also and am I allowed to compliment your clothes? Because I like your clothes, but I don't want to get in trouble. And I could just see that he was really trying to figure it out. And I had real empathy for that because we were defining new rules and the new rules left very little room for nuance. They were very strict rules, but this was something that I feel like anyone who has experienced any form of societal oppression understands that someone can compliment your clothes and you can know that they mean that they like your clothes, and they can compliment your clothes in a way that makes you feel small. And it actually doesn't matter what words they say, it matters the intention behind how they say it. And I think across different forms of oppressed identities, this general thing can be understood. But how do you explain it to cis straight white men who have never experienced this?
Right. I would say definitely for teenage boys, I think there's this real fear among teenage boys at the moment. And I think it's contributing to this sex recession, dating recession, whatever you want to call it, where teenage boys do not, are feeling very fearful of approaching girls. And in some ways, that's good and right, and absolutely, that it's a correction to a very real problem. But I think it also does come back on boys of color as well, especially on Black boys. I found in the university context, I did some reporting on these Title IX proceedings in colleges, and boys who've been accused of sexual violence, and often these are really, really complicated situations. And I think that Black boys are disproportionately accused of sexual violence by white women on college campuses, and often these accusations are found to be, if not unfounded, then very complex. There's a lot of racist maneuvering going on in there. It's not just the stereotype of the white man who, or boo-hoo, white man can't harass anyone he wants to anymore. But it's all this stuff is so layered and so complicated. But I really don't envy a teenage boy trying to date in this environment,
It's interesting. I agree with so much of that, and I think that there is definitely institutional racism that ties to much of this. But what I would say is, in terms of sort of like the white men at that time, especially, I just, as a cishet man, I just feel like I'm not saying you, but I'm not interested in infantilizing these people, right? Like, you can run a Fortune 500 company, but you can't understand how to do something creative to take, interns out who are women. I don't know. I feel like a lot of white men suddenly became childlike during that time, right? You took over the entire world. You can't understand how to navigate during the Me Too movement.
Right.
I agree with you. And also, I just feel like there were moments at the height of this movement when I would want to talk about nuance, because I do think that there has to be nuance to this conversation, and the very word nuance was suspect. Like, if I said the word nuance, it was as if I was being a rape apologist, and I felt really confused by that, because these don't feel like conversations that can be solved by like sort of the extremes of black and white. And I did feel, my little brother was in college at that time, and he came home being like, I'm really trying to get this right, but they've given us so many seminars, and they've said, like, if a woman is drinking, you cannot have sex with her. But we are drinking all the time. And so everyone is drunk always. And so, like, I don't understand, like, how to reconcile these two rules. And for me, I was like, it is so much about your intentions. And so, like, it's very hard to put a very blanket rule on things. Like, you are smart enough to know if a woman is consenting or not. And we can really speak about what it looks like to have active consent. But instead, people were being given these very blanket rules that were unnuanced, and I feel like it has created a lot of confusion.
I know that comes back to, for me, maybe just because I went to school for this, communication, right? I think, obviously, consent, so on and so forth, but I think we can't assume intentions necessarily, because I think intentions change depending upon geographic location, age, all sorts of demographic things, right? Like, if I'm walking and I give a head nod to another man and he's black, we have an understanding what that means. If I do it to a white guy, he's like, what the hell are you doing? I don't know. I communicate what I'm thinking. I communicate, again, I'm not going to infantilize some of these men, but I'm also not going to infantilize women. If we're communicating, you can give me your opinion on what you think is in not even a taste, but safe, right? Like, even as we're sitting here across from each other, from the beginning of the conversation, I originally said to you, I think you should go first, and you can tell me I don't think I should go first. And so, in many instances, you have gone first. But I hope that by communicating that, gave you the latitude to say, like, I agree or disagree. And I think that that's the sort of, like, interactions that I would want people to have. So it's not just like consent. It's so much more than consent. It's also active conversation.
I mean, one thing that I will say, I think that we give boys in general a very, very poor grounding in relational, in communication, in social skills, in emotional nuance, in picking up signals, in and that is something that starts from birth. There's like a real difference in the way that we socialize girls to like really track other people's emotions, to understand body language, to understand like what someone might be feeling, to see it as their role to like act on what somebody else might be feeling. And these are things that are sort of baked in so early that then I think by the time that kids get to college, like girls have this huge head start on this kind of communication and these relationships and understanding and like caring what another person thinks and seeing it as their responsibility to kind of track that and respond to it. And so, yeah, it's something that has to start much younger, and I think patriarchy robs boys and men of that, of those skills.
Christine Emba wrote this really wonderful article in the Washington Post called Men Are Lost, Here's a Roadmap Out of the Wilderness that if people who are listening to this conversation are interested in, I would highly recommend as further reading. And part of what she talks about is specifically how do we create a leftist counterpart to the manosphere, and what does that model of masculinity look like? And I know you both have thought about this a lot. Ruth, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's many, many different things. I don't think it's possible to just say, okay, here's the answer, get a Joe Rogan of the left or an Andrew Tate of the left, because I think those attempts often don't really feel authentic. I think it's many, many, many conversations and individual acts and, people coming together to talk about these things. And I think it's possible because, I was just thinking, you look back at, pretty much any movie from the 80s or 90s, and you look at the things that they could get away with as completely normal when it came to, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, which were just completely normal and that are not normal anymore. That, we have moved on as a culture when it comes to those issues. It's by no means perfect. There's so much work to do. But we have moved on. And I think we can do the same for the way we think about boys and men. But I think it's lots and lots of little things all the time. Lots of people doing the work, lots of people thinking, lots of conversations like this, lots of work Frederick does. And, that just it's bit by bit by bit. I don't think there's one single solution to it.
And I also want to just follow up on something that you were saying earlier of sort of how you think about raising your sons to be good humans and how you want them to have tenderness, softness, these qualities that we generally associate with feminine traits. And I really want that for men too. I want them to have friends. I want them to feel like it's valorous to cry or be vulnerable. And at the same time, I think if we're fully honest, we don't really want a society where men are more just like women. There is value to having a society where there are men and there are women and they are able to be, in the grand scheme of things, different from one another. And so I'm thinking really hard about what other messages can we give men that aren't just be more like women? I wonder if you've thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that exist socially conditioned within men and women, but I think that, again, they are socialized and conditioned, right? So I don't think that, for example, tears, right? I cried during Hamnet just like the two women next to me cried during Hamnet, right? And I think that what we have been taught is that me crying during Hamnet is some oddity. And that's sort of what I rail against. And I don't think that we have done a good job of propping up the people who rail against that, right? I'll give you a phenomenal example. There was a conversation recently about people going to this website, right? It was all these men, and I think we're all very familiar with all these men
I know what you're saying.
going to this website, and it was teaching them how to rape their wives. And I was wondering, just as I'm watching all these proper grievances by women and people, I'm like all these men are garbage. Absolutely. And I was also where's the counter? What are we actually trying to I see all the rightful rage. What is the actionable thing here? Where are we leading people to? Because it's not enough to stop at the point of just saying these men are dangerous. Absolutely. These men are frightening. Absolutely. These men are disgusting. Absolutely. What are we doing?
Yeah, what are we doing?
What are we doing?
Yeah.
Right? And so, but if you just keep people in this perpetual state of anger, you can keep on writing about it. You can keep on making videos about it. You can keep on selling things pertaining to it, and people will click and people will talk and people will, you're feeding the beast. You do not want people getting healthy. It's the same thing with patriarchy. It's the same thing with white supremacy. It all feeds capitalism. If white people are not great and they keep on doing racist things, more people sell books, more people click on articles, more people go to websites, et cetera, et cetera. It's a perpetual cycle of bigotry.
And also that whole Epstein commentary, there was no real mainstream discussion of patriarchy and how that informs that. It was a lot of people talking about class and about wealth and about money and about power, but there was very little naming of this systemic force and just talking about it, there were...
And to that point, there was, even with Epstein and everything that's transpired over the last few years, and maybe you've seen something different, I've not seen a major push to dismantle or unpack patriarchy, to your point, right?
Absolutely,
and that's the thing I'm saying. It's not we are so angry and frustrated and in disbelief and harmed and hurt by what these men did to these girls. So where are the conversations? Because this is not just wealthy white men flying girls to an island. This is happening in your neighborhood.
Right. This is the whole system. Why aren't we talking about it? I completely agree.
Yeah. So I know we've talked about this quite a bit in various ways in this conversation, but I wonder if we can just sort of quickly run through what are traits and qualities, if not of positive masculinity, then of like the kind of masculinity the left should be promoting as a counterpart to what's in the manosphere. One of my colleagues has gotten really interested in the subreddit Are Bald, where men just compliment each other. Men are like, shave it off, it'll look better. And then they're like, bro, you look great. You look amazing. And it is a very sweet corner of the internet because it's one in which men just support and compliment each other through a difficult transition time in their appearance. And I'm curious, what are those other, what are other qualities and traits of something that the left could be promoting as a vision for boys?
Yeah, I think that male friendship and male bonding, it's got such a bad name because it's become associated with like locker room talk and like gross things. It's just that sort of brotherhood, that like loyalty and courage and support for one another is something that's really lovely. And I think, I'm from the UK, and I think there is a real culture of male friendship there in a way that I don't see quite so much in the States. Maybe some of it is because of like alcohol and drinking and those kinds of things, which obviously brings up a whole new range of problems. But and I think some of it comes about from trauma, like boys being sent off to boarding school and that sort of thing. But I think there is this real culture of like male friendship and male bonding, which is very lovely that, I'd like to say.
I'll give you a good example, actually. Right now, and I can't stand this team for various reasons, but the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are in the Western Conference Finals of the NBA playoffs, are comprised of a lot of millennial, and actually Gen Z young men. And the ways in which they love on each other is such a positive sort of embracing of brotherhood, friendship, and love for each other. I've literally heard them say, like, I love you. Thank you for showing up for me tonight. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. And I think that we can be promoting that more, that there are great examples of young men and men in general who are not afraid to, like, love on each other.
Before we wrap, I want to know one traditionally masculine quality you'd want your sons or your younger brother to take on, and one that you wish they wouldn't.
Okay.
Sure.
So I think for the one, look, there's so many great qualities associated with masculinity, like courage and protection and strength and all the rest of it. But I think I'm going to go for fixing stuff. So I would love for my kids to be able to like have those skills, those old school masculine skills. So that, and then the really wouldn't, I think it's got to be emotional suppression, just like that feeling that you cannot connect with your own emotions. I think that's so unhealthy and harmful. And I really hope that my boys will be able to connect with their own emotions and those of other people.
I love that answer.
I think the first one would be being actionable. I think that we have this idea of men in our society historically, like, this thing is happening, I'm going to, jump in and try to do something. Can you be actionable about somebody saying you harmed me? Can you be actionable about someone saying I felt unsafe in this moment? So that sort of like ability to like jump in and do the thing, I'd love to see that in, say, maybe more emotional and like social ways. And then in terms of not passing down, sort of like stubbornness, right? I think that a lot of men have been taught that sort of this personal manifest destiny, if you would, like the entire world belongs to you and you just got to go out and seize it. And I kind of just want you to like stop and just listen to other people. Just like stop, just stop, right? Like just stop. Like, you're the only thing I think that you're promised in this world is the person in the mirror and what you do with that. And so, just stop and listen. Stop and listen.
That's beautifully said. Ruth, Frederick, thank you so much for being here with me today.
You.
This was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.